Arkham Audio presents Arkham Investigator Jim Culver, narrated by Tim Paul Fiscus. All copyrights belong to Fantasy Flight Games. If you enjoy this production, you can find this story and many more in the Investigators of Arkham hardcover book. Jim Culver. Jim waited for the mourners to file out. All three of them. They were people whom Cassie barely knew. Not that anyone could really be said to have known Cassie well, but they had worked with her at the club on Rue Bourbon for the grand total of the 3 weeks she'd been there. The bartender saw him on the way out and tipped his hat. The coat-check girl eyed Jim nervously. The owner muttered, "Damn shame," in Jim's direction, and got a nod in response, and all hurried on their way. Had anyone mourned his father when he'd passed? The sun sank lower as the grave-digger shoveled dirt over the young lady's rough plywood coffin. While the last rays of light faded from the horizon like a flickering candle, Jim finally walked to the grave. It was humbly marked with a chunk of rock a stitch too poor to be called a proper gravestone. The grave-digger patted down the last of the earth over Cassie's last resting place, then turned, unsurprised to see Jim. "Glad you waited till I was done," he croaked, and shook his head. "I don't like your songs particularly. Not that they ain't fine, sure, but—" "I understand," Jim cut in. "No harm done. I just want to stick around a bit, play something special. I won't be long." The gravedigger frowned at him, then shrugged and cocked his head at the kerosene lamp nearby. "I'll be at the front gate a spell. Bring that round when you're finished." Jim doffed his hat in thanks, and the man sniffed and walked into the rising mist of the night, shovel cocked over one shoulder like a rifle. Jim looked down at the grave and sighed. "Cassie," it said, "you'll be mised." Didn't even get the spelling right. But rock carving didn't come cheap, and there was only so much in the collection. Goodwill only goes so far when you've only known someone 3 weeks, even someone as sweet and sad as Cassie was. Even if they'd known more about her, they didn't have the coin to fit it. Jim set his instrument case on a nearby mourner's bench, took off his coat and folded it beside. Even in the sweltering night and the haunting air of the graveyard, late summer in New Orleans was oppressively humid. Jim didn't want to look starched and uncomfortable when talking to his audience. He snapped open the case and took out his late father's trumpet, the trumpet with the smooth weld connecting the long bell to the rest of the body, the trumpet with the writing inside the mouth, in a language none of those experts were able to read. He took out the mouthpiece from the case, buzzed a little practice buzz in it, and fitted it carefully into the lead pipe. His setup was as familiar as that of a batter stepping up to the plate, gently kicking his legs, flexing his arms at the elbow, moving his head back and forth, like his father'd always used to do. Then he placed his lips and began to play. The song spilled out into the night like a long-held breath, a sigh of relief against the hot late summer night. The tune was a new one, hardly a handful of months out from the radio, but here, coming from the bell of that instrument, it felt so old, so true, so solid. Moments drifted by, like sips of a sweet, smooth drink. And then, faintly at first, but growing stronger, a woman's voice, soft and shy, joined in. "So make my bed and light the light. I'll arrive late tonight. Blackbird, bye-bye." The song arced into a final note, held as long as Jim could hold it, ringing in the air. When he let it go, opened his eyes and looked around, Cassie was standing there, pale and transparent, looking like she wanted to chase the notes she'd just sung off into the sky. "Beautiful as always." She started a moment, then smiled at him sadly. "I'm just glad I was able to sing. If I'd just been able to listen. I mean, you play beautifully, but—" "I understand," he said gently. The ghost smiled faintly and looked down at her tombstone and shook her head with a rueful laugh. "Too much wishful thinking in common with that tune," she sighed airlessly. "Here lies Cassie, same sad song. Fell in love, was done wrong. Hit by a car that didn't slow down. Buried with the wrong name, in the wrong town." "Not a song without precedent here, I'm afraid," said a familiar voice. And another ghost materialized from the mist, smiling faintly. "But you have my sympathies, miss." The singularity of the connection between him and the woman broken, Jim looked around him for the first time. "Not to be disrespectful, Jean, but the crowd seems a little light tonight. I sort of thought there'd be more folks around." "To welcome this young lady into our sad company," the male ghost finished, spreading thin, ethereal fingers in a gesture of apology. Sadly, no. I felt responsible for arriving, being a devotee of your work, but even I felt misgivings about coming back." "Back?" Cassie said quickly, concern on her face. "So this isn't permanent? Being a ghost, I mean?" The other ghost smiled without humor and reached out to gently take and pat her hand. "Unfortunately, no, dear lady. This state is but a passing fancy, brought on by whatever ancient magic lives in that horn of Mr. Culver's. Within hours we shall fade as the mist before the morning light, and pass into the afterlife once more." "But you've come before," she protested. "Oh, indeed," the ghost of Jean agreed. "But it does not last. Each time it is a moment less than the time preceding, and some years here I think are far too long gone to listen." Jim frowned. Would his father be one of those too far gone? Even if Jim tried, even if it did work, what would he say to his old man? "Jean," he offered, hesitant, "what's it like to come back?" The question had always burned in him from the first time he'd seen the horn's true power, but he'd never dared ask it until tonight. Jean looked at him slowly, as if he'd known the question had been coming for as long as Jim had feared to ask it. His smile was small and without humor. "I somewhat lacked the words to tell you, James," he began, and paused as a breeding man might. "But for your sake, and perhaps that of many others, I shall try. It is not like waking up. No, not like sleep at all. It is as if you were a ship, sunken deep in the murky bowels of the ocean. It's dark and quiet, and all around you is nothingness. Then you hear a sound. Not a song exactly, not yet. More like a feeling, a call. Like the feeling of hunger or an incoming headache or a sneeze. Only all at once, and far stronger, pulling you up from the depths. And as you come up, you see light invading the depths and strange things there, wiggly, murky things out there in the water with you, things that make you want to thrash and scream. But then you've broken the surface. You have the form you had when you died, after a fashion, and all seems well." He paused again, and somehow his voice seemed even more hollow. "But you remember." Cassie looked stricken, her hands to her face. "How awful! No wonder others didn't want to come back." Again Jean smiled, even more pained than before. "Not exactly. Lately, it has been worse. When you pass through that murk, what were feelings before are clearer, faces, voices, from something truly ancient." Jim frowned. "But I thought you said the older things were, the harder it was for them to come back." Jean nodded. "Oh, these things aren't reaching out to the living. Well, not directly. They're far too long dead for that. but they are reaching out to those of us who still are drawn to the call of your horn, a conduit between what is old and forgotten and the new and the living." He pursed his spectral lips a moment. "All of them communicate some kind of warning, unclear, sadly, but of something truly dire." Jim's heart was in his throat. "Can you make anything out?" Gene frowned, like he was casting about for words. "It's like describing a sunset to someone who's always been blind," he confessed. "Mostly they seem to put images in your head, or perhaps it is better said that they attach them to you somehow. Visions of things which are not quite human, things that bear a human form but the likeness of frogs or salamanders. The images are so vivid and real, it is almost as though one is touching their clammy skin and looking into those vast, deep, dead eyes. And though they seem to shriek, you know they are without voice.